Hello and welcome to Unit 3, Lesson 6. Our objective in this unit is to factor trinomials in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, and we need to remember a few vocabulary words: factor, binomial, and trinomial. So before we get started, let's go ahead and break down our objectives so we know what the goal of today's lesson is. So in this point in our studies, we know that when we say the word factor, that this means that we are going to take out a GCF, and we are also going to break down our trinomial into a product of two binomials, remembering that a binomial is two terms, typically in the form of ax plus b. Product means multiplied, so we're looking to multiply two binomials together. So factor trinomials, so that means we're starting with three terms, and our trinomials are in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So this means that our x squared variable has a coefficient of a, and our x variable has a coefficient of b, and c is our constant. So if we take this objective and rewrite it for our goal of the lesson, we see that our goal today is starting with three terms where our x squared has a coefficient of a, x has a coefficient of b, and c is a constant. We are going to take out a GCF and break down into the product of two binomials. If we are looking at this in symbols, it means that we're starting with an expression that looks like this, ax squared plus bx plus c, and by the end, we will end up with something in this pattern. This first part will be our GCF, and this will be binomial 1 and binomial 2. So let's take a look at how this is done. This method has quite a few steps, and we are going to pull in some of the things we've learned in previous units. So we're going to start by looking at the expression 30x squared plus 14x minus 8. And as we have done in the past, as we look to factor, the first thing we are looking for is a GCF. So if I am looking at my terms, 30x squared plus 14x minus 8, I am looking for a term, either a whole number or a variable that can come out of each term. In this case, I see that all of these are divisible by 2, so my GCF is 2, and when I divide each term by 2, I end up with 15x squared plus 7x minus 4. Once we factor out the GCF, we're going to mark that aside and say my GCF is 2, because that is the number outside my parentheses, and we are going to focus on the trinomial of 15x squared plus 7x minus 4. So let's go ahead and identify our a, b, and c values. So we remember that our a value is the number in front of the x squared. So a is equal to 15. Our b value is the number in front of x. So b is equal to 7. And our c value is our constant term, which doesn't have a variable, and we remember we take the sign with it, so c equals -4. In our last section, we were looking at combinations of things that multiplied to get to c and added to get to b. But in this case, a has to come into play. Before, our a was equal to 1, so it didn't matter. So our first step in our process is going to be to multiply a times c. So when we say a times c, we start with 15 times -4 which gives us negative 60. So once we find our A times C, we're going to use the same method we've used in the past, our X method. So in this case, we need to put A times C in our top box. In the past, we just put C, but when A is not equal to 1, we put our A times C in the top box, and we put our B term in the bottom box. And just like before, we are going to look for an M value and an N value that multiplies to negative 60 and adds to 7. So in order to do that, we need to find the factors of negative 60. So negative 60, if we were just doing positive 60, we could list our factors. 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20. So remember, these factors are just factors that multiply to get 60. 5 and 12, and 6 and 10. And we know that this has to be a negative 60, so one side or one number has to be negative. So when I add these together, we actually have two sets of factors because we can have all the positive ones on the left, or we can have, or on the right, or all the positive ones on the left. And we need to see which pair adds to give us 7. So when I'm looking at these, I notice that my 7 is positive, and I notice that if I add 12 plus a negative 5, I get 7. So my M value can be negative 5, and my N value can be 12. Before, we were able to stop here and write our final answer. But because A does not equal 1 in this example, we have to take it one step further. And I have two different methods to show you today of how to take this one step further. So I'm going to start by writing down the terms I know. My A term was 15x squared, with A being 15. My B term was 7x. My C term was negative 4. And I found that my M, negative 5, and my N was 12, because negative 5 plus 12 got me negative 60. So I'm going to use the box first. And in the box, this is similar to how we learned to use a table to FOIL. I'm going to start by putting my entire A term in this first box. And I'm going to put my entire C term in the bottom left box. Now, just like when we FOILed, our M and our N, or the terms on this diagonal, had an x with them. So we are going to say that M equals negative 5x and N equals 12x. So N equals negative 5x and N equals 12x. So this is what we got when we FOILed before. And we're going to do FOILing backwards by pulling out a GCF. So this is how it works. I'm going to start by looking at this first row. And I'm going to find the GCF of my first row. Both of those terms have a 5x. So I'm going to pull a 5x out. I'm then going to look at my second row. and I am going to pull out the greatest common factor, which is a 4. And then I'm going to start looking at my columns. So I'm going to look at this column, and I'm going to pull out what is alike. I can take out a 3x out of both of those. And then lastly, I'm going to look at this column, and I can't take anything out bigger than a 1, so this just becomes a 1. So in order to write my final answer, I'm going to look at the binomials that are on the outside. So I'm going to put my 3x plus 1 and 5x plus 4 down below. My factored form of my trinomial 15x squared plus 7x minus 4 is 3x plus 1, 5x plus 4. So if you are a visual person and like the box method, pause the video now, and we will skip over to the final answer. If you'd like to see a different method, keep watching. So the second method we can use is called split the middle. And in split the middle, we start with our binomial. So my binomial is 15x squared plus 7x minus 4. My goal is going to be to use my m and my n terms to actually split this middle term. So I'm going to rewrite 15x squared plus negative 5x plus 12x minus 4. And I'm going to group these. So I'm going to group them so I have the first two terms together and the second two terms together. And I'm going to pull out the GCF of the first terms. So the GCF of these two terms is 5x. And then whatever I have left over, when I divide them out, I put in my remaining parentheses. So this is 3x minus 1. And then I'm going to pull out the GCF of my second set of parentheses. So I can pull out a 4. And when I pull out a 4, I get 3x minus 1. We see that my parentheses are the exact same. So I take those down and pulling out a GCF again, so I get 3x minus 1. And then what's left over on the outside? 5x plus 4. So I ended up with the same answer, 3x minus 1, and 5x plus 4. And in fact, I'm going to correct this over here. I should have taken out a negative 1 there. Now, are we finished yet? We are not. We have to write this in final form. So we have to rewrite our answer as the product of our GCF. So we remember up here that our original GCF was 2. So we bring that down here, 2, and then we write our binomials, 3x minus 1 and 5x plus 4. Now we are in factored form, and we can finish this by checking our answer by refoiling it all out.